Hey guys, welcome back. So in this video, I'm going to cover React fundamentals and basics that you need to get started with React as a developer. We are going to build this contact management application and we are going to break this application into functional components and class components. So in this application, you can see that we have a header, then we have a component which is the add contact, and we are going to see how we can handle the input fields of the form. Then we have the contact list, which is going to display all the list of the contacts that we have added. So let me add a contact. So we will add a contact as test@gmail.com. And if I click on add, then you will see that the test contact is added in the list. And we can also click on the delete icon and we can delete the contacts. And you will notice that if we refresh the page, we still persist the contact list and we are storing this contact list in the local storage. Also, if we try to submit the empty form, then we have an alert which says all fields are mandatory. Even though the application looks simple, but we are going to cover a lot of React concepts, and that is going to help you to build a solid foundation for React skills. So if this sounds interesting, then watch the video till the end. Also, don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. So let's get started. Alright guys, so before we start with this project, I want to tell you that what all things that we are going to cover in this video. So in this video, we are going to see how we create the React app, how we use the components, class components, function components, what are states, props, how we pass data between parent to child and child to parent, how we handle the events, forms, and we are not going to cover the API calls and React router. So in the next video, which will be the enhancement of this same project, we are going to use the React router and we are going to create the fake APIs to fetch the data. But for the part of this video, we are going to persist our data in the local storage. So the first thing what we need is we need to have Node.js installed on our machine. So if you don't have Node.js installed, quickly install the Node.js from the official website. So this is the official website of the Node.js. You can click on the current version and you can download the installer, and you just need to click next, 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 and you will be able to install Node.js on your machine. So if you need any help in the installation part, then I have a video on it. You can click on the card above and jump to it directly. So once you have installed the Node.js, you can go to the terminal. So right now I'm going to my terminal and I can simply type node-v and it's going to give me the version of the Node.js that is installed. All right, so now we have installed the Node.js. The next thing we need to do is we need to create a React app. And to create the React app, let's go to the GitHub page of React app. So this is the GitHub page of the React app. And if we scroll down, then we will see that how we can actually create the React app. So we are going to use npx create React app and the app name. So let's create a React app. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to write npx create React app and I'm going to name as contact app and hit enter. And this is going to take some time to initialize and download all the dependencies. So we'll take a pause here. All right, so now our app is created and let's see actually what all happens when we run the npx create React app. So when we actually run the create React app, it actually downloads a lot of dependencies, and we can see here that 1904 packages have been added as the dependencies for this project. And it also gives you in the last that what all the commands you can use directly. So to start the development server, we can use npm start. And in order to build our application for a production deployment, we can run the npm run build, and that is going to minify all our files. And if we want to run the test cases, then we can use the npm. Then we have the npm run eject, which we don't use generally much. And now let's start this application. So to start the application, we are going to go to the directory. So I am in the contact app directory, and then I'm going to write npm start. And this is going to start our development environment on a localhost port 3000 by default. So let's wait for it. Meanwhile, let's see the folder structure of the application. So we have the node modules where all our dependencies are. Then we have a public folder. Then we have a source folder. This source folder is the folder where we are going to write all our application code. We have a git ignore file to ignore the files and folders. Then we have the package JSON. This package JSON is containing all the dependencies. And you can also see the scripts which you can run. So you can run the npm start, build, test, eject. Then this is the README file of the project. Let's go to the public folder. So in the public folder, we have the fav icon, the index.html. And in the index.html, you will see that we have only one div with an ID of root. So all our application which we are going to create through React is going to be in this root div. Then we have some images which we got by default with the project. We have a manifest file and robots.txt, which we don't want for this project. In the source file, if we see that we have the app.js, the main is the index.js, which is the starting point of this application. So in the index.js, you will see that we have a React and React DOM library imported. And here the React DOM.render, which is actually going to render our application in the root div which we saw in the index.html. So if you see that we are very familiar with this code, get element by ID. So we have took that root element reference, and in that root element reference, we are actually embedding this app component. Next, we have the app.js, which is the default functional component. This is a functional component which is created from the React project. And we have the CSS for the CSS file. All right, so our development server is started. Now let's go to the development server, and this is the initial app component which we are seeing on the screen. So this is how we can run the application. Now let's go and delete all the default stuffs because we are going to create everything from scratch. So I will go to the public folder. I'm going to remove all these files we don't want. So I'm going to delete them. Okay, and here we don't want this app test. We don't, because we are not doing anything with the tests at the moment. And then we are going to remove all these files. All right, so let's delete them. And let's go to app.js. We don't want all this stuff. So let's remove these. We don't have CSS file anymore. All right, and then what we are going to do is we are going to create our own folder structure. So what we are going to create multiple components. So let's create a directory of components that will contain all our components. All right, and we are also going to have some images. So I'm going to create one more directory for images. So that will have images. All right, and all our components will be in this component file. So let's go and create some components. So we have the header component. So I'm going to go here and first create the header component. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to write a header.js. So this is our header component. And then we need a add contact.js. Then we need the contact list. So I'm going to create the contact list.js. Then I'm going to create the contact card. So I'm going to create this contact card.js. All right, and we already have the app.js. So let's move this app.js into our component and also move the CSS into our component. All right, so this is how our folder structure now looks like. We have an index.js file, and then we have the app in our component file. So let's go to the app.js. All right, and we are going to remove this logo. We don't want the logo, and we are going to remove all this stuff. Let's go and return a div, and I'm going to say hello world. All right, and let's save this. Okay, and now let's see how it looks. So if I refresh this page, we can see a hello world. So for this project, we are not going to focus on the CSS. So for the CSS, I'm going to use Semantic UI library. So let's go to the Semantic UI. So this is the Semantic UI official website. You can explore it later on. And I'm going to copy this because I'm going to use the CSS. So I'm going to copy this and we are going to add it in the index.html. So in the index.html, I'm going to remove this manifest and I'm going to add my. All right, let's save it and let's see how it looks now. All right. So the font size is and font family is changed. So that means our semantic UI is working properly. So let me minimize this screen. All right. So we don't want this index.js now to be open. So let's close this. Let's close this as well. And let's close all other components also. So let's understand first what is this components and all about. So a component is a piece of reusable code which you can be reused at any point, and it's an individual piece of code which has its own inputs, which has its own outputs, and it has its own functionality. So this is the app component, and we are returning from the app component a div of hello world. And this looks like an HTML, but it's not an HTML. It is called the JSX, which is a combination of a JavaScript and HTML, because you cannot write an HTML in a JavaScript file, which looks like this. And you can do all this is because we are using the React library. So let me import the React library here. So you can import a React library simply like this. Go to add React. All right, and then what we are going to do, that our application has three components in it. So the first one is the header component. So let's go and import the header. So I'm going to import the header from header. So we have the header. Next, we are going to import the add contact. So let's import the add contact. So I'm going to do add contact from add contact. And the last one we need is the contact list from contact list. So we have imported all these three components, but right now there is nothing in those component files. So what we can do is we are going to actually return. So if we want to return more than one div or more than one element, then we can use this parenthesis and then we can actually add a div here. All right, and this div will return all those components. So first it's going to return the header component, and you can use this header components as a custom HTML elements, because right now if you see that header, it similarly looks like an HTML element. So you can use it either the self-closing part, or if you want to add some data in it like this, then you can actually do the closing of the element tag. So right now I'm just going to do a self-closing. And then I need to have an add contact. So I'm going to add the add contact. And in the last, we will have the contact list. So let's add the contact list. And you're not going to see anything on the screen at the moment because we don't have anything on them. So let's go and write some code in our header, contact list, and contact. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to open my header.js, my add contact.js, and my contact list. All right. And first we are going to do the same import React from React. All right. And we are going to create another functional component. So I'm going to do a constant header. This will be an function expression. I'm going to use a arrow function, and this is going to return. So let's return the header from. So I'm going to use the semantic UI. So I'm going to use some classes of the semantic UI. So let's create a div with a class name. So you will notice that you cannot use class as a selector here, because class in JavaScript are the classes for the object-oriented programming. So that's why you need to use a class name. So this is a difference between writing a simple HTML and writing a JSX. So I'm going to use some classes here, UI fixed menu. All right, and inside them, I'm going to create another class, and this is going to contain the UI container center. All right, and then I'm going to do an h2, and this h2 will be having my contact manager. All right, so now we have created this functional component and we are getting an error, and that is because we haven't exported this header, and we are using this header in our app.js. So we need to export this. So how we can export this? We can do the export default and the header. All right, so now we have exported the header, and if I refresh my page, then I'm going to see an error. And this is obvious because I don't have these components yet. So I'm going to comment this out for the moment. So if I comment this out, now we can see that we have the header. So the next thing we are going to do is we are going to create the add contact, which will have the contact form. So let's go and create the add contact form. So I'm going to go to the add contact. And this time I'm not going to create a functional component. I'm going to create a class component. So you can create the component in both the ways. So either you can use the function or you can use the class. So let me show you how you can do the class component. So I'm going to add the React here. All right. Then in order to create a class component, you just write the class add contact extends React dot component, and this is our class component, and in the end we are going to export this. So I'm going to write export default add contact. All right, and while writing the class component, you cannot simply just write a return, and you need to use a render method. So I'm going to use this render method, and then I'm going to return what I want to return from this render method. So what we want from this render method is we are going to create a form with the name and email ID. So let's create the form. I'm going to use a div with a class name of UI main. So you don't need to worry about all this CSS and the classes. They are coming from the Sematic UI, which is actually not relevant for this video. Then we are going to have the add contact. And after this, we need to create a form. So let's create a form with a class name of UI form. All right. And then we need to create a class name of field. Inside the field, we are going to create a label, and this label will be name. Then I'm going to create an input of type text. Name will be name to it. Then let's create a placeholder. So I'm adding a placeholder of name. All right, and then we are going to create another input field. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy this and paste this. So let's copy this and let's add it. All right, so now we have both the fields, and let's go and check here. So I'm going to uncomment this out again. And now let's comment only this one. All right. And if I save it, then we can see that we have the add contact name, email. So now we need to have an add button. So let's add the button. So in the end, I'm going to go to the div, and here I'm going to add the button. All right. And for the button, I'm going to use the class name UI button blue, and I'm going to add here. All right. So now we have the button as well. And the next thing we are going to do is we will just create a functional component this time again in the contact list. So let's add the import React from React. So I'm going to write a constant contact list is equals to an arrow function. And then we can export this default contact list. And for now we are just going to return a div with a class name UI cell list, and then I'm going to write here contact list. All right, and now let's uncomment this as well. So now we have the contact list as well. So we have created all the components which we needed. And what we are going to do is we are going to style this app component a little bit. So I'm going to add a class name, and let's add a class name of UI space container. All right, so now we will see that how we can actually render a list in React. So in order to render a list in React, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a list here. So let's have a list of contacts, and this is going to be an array, and it's going to have the field as ID, and I'm going to name as ID1. Then it's going to have a name. I'm going to give name as the page. Then it's going to have an email. I'm going to give at email as malvia@gmail.com. All right, and let's create one more list. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add this. Let's make this 2, make this as Nikesh, and let's make this as Nix. All right, so now we have 2 contacts. So in order to pass this contacts in the contact list, so we can use props. So in order to use the props, I'm going to write here as contacts as the property name, and I'm going to pass the prop which I want to pass. So I want to pass my contacts array. So let me add the contacts array. All right, so now I have passed this contact list with a contact as a property and a contact array. And this contacts can be accessed in the context list via props. So if you want to access the props, you have a default parameter here called props. And if I actually do a console.log of this props, then you should be able to see the props. So if I inspect it, all right, and if I expand this, then you can see that we actually get the contacts. And now once we have the context object, we can do anything with the context object. So let's go to the contact list and let's render the list. I'm going to create a function here. So you can create a function and you can do a render contact list. And this function is going to take the props of contacts and we are going to map them. This is going to have a contact, and then we are going to have an arrow function, and inside the contact we are going to return a JSX blocks. So I'm going to create a div with a class name of item. Inside the item I want a div with a class name content. Inside the content I'm going to create a div with the class name of header, and this is going to have the name. So we have 2 properties, name and the email ID. Sorry, this should be contact.name. So I'm going to do a contact.name, and the other one is div with a contact.email. So this is going to give us the email address as well. All right, and then we also want the trash icon. So let's go and add the trash icon. So I'm going to add the icon here, class name as trash, alternate, outline, icon. So now we have created this render list function, and now we actually want to render this. So I'm going to copy this and I am actually going to return this from here. So if I hit enter and I add this, so in order to reference this, we are going to add this. So I'm not actually adding this parenthesis because I don't want to execute this function at the moment. So I'm just going to reference the render list. All right, now if I save it, then you can actually see that we get the list. So this is how you can actually create the list and render the list in React. The next thing we are going to do is, it seems that this part is being repeating. We can actually remove this part and we can create a component of this part. So I'm going to go here, and so I already have the contact card, and we are going to move this piece of JSX into our contact card. So let's go and create the contact card first. So I'm going to do an import React from React constant card contact. This is going to be an arrow function. All right, and then we are going to export the default contact card. And this function is going to return the JSX of this card component. So let's add that JSX. So I'm going to do a return here, and inside the return, I'm going to copy this block and I'm going to add this block here. So I have copied this as well. All right. So now we have this contact card, and if we want to add the inline styles, so I'm going to add a style here, and to add the style you will have the curly braces, and inside the curly braces you are going to have another curly braces which will contain our CSS properties. So I'm going to give a color of red to my trash icon, and I'm also going to give a margin top. So usually when we write the CSS, we write margin hyphen top, but we don't use hyphens while doing the while writing it in the JSX. So we use usually the camel case. So I'm going to write the top, and the top will be 7 pixel. All right, but we don't have this contact name and contact email address. So we have to get these from the contact list, and we are going to use the props again. So I'm going to add the props here. So let me add the props. All right, so I will have to pass the props from the contact list. So let's go to the context list. Let's remove this. We don't want this now. And instead of this, we are going to pass the contact card. All right, and let's import the contact card here. So I'm going to import the contact card from contact card, and we need to pass the contact here. So I'm going to pass the contact, and let's pass the contact. All right, and now we have passed the contact, and we will use this contact in our contact cards. So here we will do one thing. We are going to use a destructuring, so we don't have to repeat every time here props.contact.name, props.contact.email. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to write a constant here, and then I'm going to add the ID, the name, and the email, and this will be equals to props.contact. All right, and now we can use this name here directly. So we can use the name here, and we can use the email here. All right, so we are getting an error that contact card is not defined. So let's see what we have done. Oops, I have actually written wrong. It should be contact card. And let's copy this and let's add this. Okay, let's go back here. Contact card, contact card. All right. So now we actually render the contact list properly. So now we have the contact card here, and we will do one thing. We have an image here. So let's add the image. So if you want to add the images in the React, so I already have the image here. So let me show you the image. So in the images folder, I have the user.png. So in order to add the user.png here, we are going to import the image first. So let me import the image user from images slash user dot png. All right, and now I'm going to add an image here. So I'm going to add an image tag with a class name, and this image tag will have a class name of UI avatar image, and the source will be the user which we are adding. The source will be the user, and let's give the alt tag of user, and then let's close the tag. All right, and if I save it, then you will see that you have a proper image now and our list properly, and we have the trash icon as well. So the next thing we are going to do is we are now going to build the functionality. Right now we have only set the components and placed all the components. Now we are going to actually build the functionality. So what we are going to do, first we are not going to use these two static lists. So we will go to the app component. All right, and in the app component I will actually going to remove this, and instead of this we are going to make use of a state. So if we are using a functional component, then we are going to make use of React hooks. I'm going to add here useState. So this is a React hook. In order to use the states in our functional component, we use the React hook. So in the React hook, how you can do is I'm going to create a constant. I will have the contacts, and set context, and this will be equals to use state, and this will be the what will be the initial value of your contact. So initially the contacts will be an empty array. So let me add an empty array here. So now we have created the state of this contacts, and what we want is if we add anything, the name and the email, and if we click on the add, we actually want to add the contacts in the contacts. So what we are going to do, we are going to go to the add contacts, and in the add context we are actually going to create the state, and this state will be the class state. We are not going to use any React hook in the class component. We can actually create a state directly, and we are going to have an object, and this state will have the name. So we have two fields, name and email. So I'm going to add the name and email. And in the input, what we can do is that we're going to write an event on change. So let me add an on change, and this on change we have an arrow function. So this is going to return an event, and I'm going to update the state, do the set state. So if you want to update the state, you use the set state, and inside the set state I'm going to have the name, and the value of name will be the event dot target dot value. All right, and we are going to use same state as a value in the input. So I'm going to use a value here, and this value will be this dot state dot name. All right, and we are going to do the same thing in our email as well. So let's go to the email and add the same thing here, and we are just going to change the state as email, and this will be get changed as email. And now when we actually click on the add, we need to submit this form. So for the form, well, let's go here, and so I'm going to write a on submit, and on submit I'm going to call a function this dot add. So right now we don't have this add function, so I'm going to create a function add, an arrow function. All right, and I'm going to use event dot prevent default because I'm using a button and I don't want my page to get refreshed. So I'm using a prevent default, and I'm going to do that if this dot state dot name is equal to equals if it's empty, and this dot state dot email if this is equals to empty, then I'm going to do an alert, and this alert will say all the fields are mandatory, and we are going to return this function. But if it's not, let me console.log. So if I do a console.log of this dot state, let's see what we have. So I'm going to do an inspect here. All right, so if I write the page here, and I'm going to add the page at the rate gmail.com, and if I click on the add, then I actually get the object here. But I need to pass this object to my app component, because my app component is the one which will actually going to add this contact into the contacts array. So we saw that if we want to pass a data from a parent to a child, we use the props. But if we want to pass something from a child to the parent, we can actually use the props. So we are actually going to pass a handler here. So I can pass a function as an prop. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a add contact handler will be equals to add contact handler. So let me add the add contact handler. And once I have the handler, I need to define this function. So I'm going to write constant handler is equals to, and this is going to get a contact from the add contact component. This will be an arrow function, and I'm just going to do a console.log contact. All right. And now let's go and add this in here. Now the handler which we pass from the app component, we can use that handler as prop. So this dot prop dot add contact handler, and we can pass the state here because our state contains the name and email ID. So now if I add the page here and test, and if I click, then I can see that I can get my object in the app.js as well. So this is what we wanted. But what we want that once we actually click on the ad, we want to clear this fields. So to clear the field, what we will do, we are going to set the state. So this dot set state, and we are going to clear the name and email. So let's clear the name and email and save it. And let's remove this console log as well. All right. And now if I pass the page and test the page, and if I click, then all right. So I added the name as empty and it still got submitted. So this should become or. We don't want any of the field to be empty. So now if I add the page and if I add test and if I click, then I get the object in the app.js and my fields are also cleared. So this is what we wanted. Now we have passed the fields. Now we need to add this fields into our contact state. So if I go here, I get the contacts here and I'm going to do a set contacts. And when you do a set contacts, you never directly manipulate the contacts. You always use set contacts to update the state. So you never directly update the state with this contact. You have to use the set contact. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take all the previous state which I was there in the context. So I'm going to use a rest. So I'm going to use contacts and then I want to add the new contacts. So to add the new contact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to simply write the contacts. All right, so now we have set the state. So this is an array. So I have to add the array. All right, and now let's add the page and test. And if I click it, then I can see that I can actually add it. So if I add another one, then I can actually add it. But if I refresh it, then you will see that these list gets, we are not persisting the data. So in order to persist the data, we are actually going to use the local storage. So for using the local storage, I'm going to use one more React hook, which is the use effect. And what this use effect do is actually whenever the value actually changes, the use effect help us to render the component again. So I'm going to use the use effect, and inside the use effect it actually takes a arrow function, and here you are going to add the dependency. So for us it's the contacts, so I'm going to add the contacts here. All right, oops, I added a use effect. Yep. All right, and inside this what I'm going to do, we are actually going to add this in the local storage. So I'm going to use local storage dot set item, and inside the set item I need to have a key. So let me add a key here, constant lo local underscore storage underscore key, and this key will be equals to, so let's add the contacts here. All right, so I'm going to use the key now here. So I'm going to add the local storage key contact, and I'm going to do the JSON dot stringify the contacts. All right, so now we have stored it in the local storage, and now let's go and inspect that whether we are able to store it in the local storage or not. So I'm going to go to the application tab, and inside the application I'm going to go to the context. So right now I can see the context is empty. So let's add the page here and click. So as soon as I click it, then you will be able to see that the data is being entered into the local storage. Now we also want that when we actually refresh the page, we want grab the information from the local storage and display it. So for that we are going to use one more use effect. So let me copy this, and I'm going to add the one more use effect, and this will become the get item, and we are only going to get the item of the contacts. And after getting the data from the local storage, I need to store it into a variable. So let me store it into a variable. So I'm going to do a contacts. Okay. And I need to parse this string. So let me add a JSON dot parse, and this is going to parse the string. All right, so now I have retrieved the data back from the local storage. Now I have to set the state of set context. So let me add the set context, and inside the set context, I'm going to use the retrieve context. And I only want to do this if the retrieve contact is available. So I'm going to add here retrieve contacts. This will be an empty array. All right, so now let's refresh it. And let's go to the console. All right, we don't have anything. And now let's add it. So I'm going to add the page test and I click, it gets added. Let me add the other one. If I click, it gets added and let me refresh it. So when I refresh it, I still able to retrieve it. So that means our use effects for storing and retrieving is working very well. All right, so we have done the addition, we have done this. Now the only thing we need is we want to delete the contact. So if I want to delete the contact, what I want the ID of the contact. And right now our contact is not having any ID. So let's go and inspect. At each child in the list should have a unique key. And we don't have the unique key because right now we are only having name and email, which is not the unique. So what we are going to do, we are going to use a package to generate the UUID. So I'm going to do cd contact app and I'm going to install the npm install UUID v4. And this is going to give us the unique ID for each of our contact. Right, so our package is installed and now let's import the UUID. So I'm going to do an import and we are going to use the UUID from UUID version 4 and we are going to use it. We actually add the data. So this is here what we are going to do. We are going to create an object and inside the object I will have the UUID. All right. And then I need the name and the email. So I'm just going to use the REST operator and I'm going to use the contacts. All right. And now if I refresh it, everything is still works the same. So now we are actually going to delete the contact based on this ID. So let's write the delete function. So I'm going to write here constant remove contact handler. And this is actually going to get an ID. And then based on the ID, we are going to create the copy of the contacts first. So let me create the copy of contact list. And then once we get the copy, we are going to filter out the contacts. So I'm going to do contacts dot filter, and this is going to have a individual contact. All right, and then we are going to do a return contact dot ID is not equals to ID. All right, and now I have the new contact list and now I'm going to change the contacts state. So let's do the set state new contact list. All right, and now I have to pass this handler to the contact list. So I'm going to pass the handler here. So I'm going to give a property name as get contact ID, and this contact ID will take my handler. All right, so in the contact list, we are going to create the function. So I'm going to use the delete contact handler. So in order to get the ID is available inside the contact card. So inside the contact card, we have this icon, and on this icon, we can actually write a click handler. So I'm going to do on click. So when you actually click, what you are going to do, you're going to run an arrow function, and this arrow function is going to take a prop of click handler, and with the prop it's going to pass the ID because it has the access to the ID. Now we have to pass this click handler, and this click handler can be passed from the contacts. So let's go here and add the handler. So click handler will be equals to the, we need to pass this here. So now we are passing the click handler from the inner child to its parent, and then from parent to its parent, which is the contact card. It will give the ID to the contact list. From the contact list is going to give the ID to the app.js. So there is a better way of doing it, but for now, let's stick to the basic part, how we can do these stuffs. Let me write this contact handler. So this is going to get the ID from the contact card. All right. And once we get the ID, what we are going to do, we are actually going to use the props dot get contact ID and pass the ID. All right. So from the app.js, we have passed the contact ID as a property. So this contact ID as a property is going to get the ID from the delete contact handler. And this delete contact handler, we have actually passed to the click handler, which is go to the contact ID. All right. And now if I save it, then if I click here, then I should be able to get it. And it's actually deleting everything. So let me refresh it. All right, and let me add a new. So there is something wrong, and let's go and inspect it. Right, so if I go here and I see, then yeah, one thing we need to do is we actually need to add the key here. So let's add the key, and this key will be equals to contact.id. All right, and let's refresh it and let's try it again. So I'm going to add the page. So something is wrong with the structure. So let's go here and make the structure correct. So this should be contact. All right. And now if I refresh it, then let's add another one test. And if I click it, I'm able to add. Let's add one more, mike@gmail.com. So if I click it, then it's going to add another one. And if we click on it, we can actually going to delete. And if we refresh it, we can going to retrieve it. So this app was actually simple in terms of the functionality, but the concepts which we have used is very important. We have used a lot of React concepts. We have used hooks, we have used states, we have used functional component, class component, style, the React JSX. We know how to use the local storages, how to retrieve the data back. So in the next video, what we are going to do is we are going to enhance this more. This time we have used local storages to persist the data, but in the next video, we are actually going to create the JSON DB, and we will store the data in the JSON DB, retrieve it using the Axios, and we are also going to see the React router. So I don't want to overwhelm you with the long video, everything in the one video. So let's go and step by step, and that's all I have for this video. I hope you liked the video. A thumbs up is appreciated. And if you learned something from this video, please like and subscribe and share it. Thank you. Thanks for watching.